We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, on this installment of Illinois Rising. And Pat, I assume the story I read in Crain is very much like a story you would have read in a Caracas business journal about 4 or 5 years ago at the height of the Hugo Chavez reign and Chavezonomics, making socialism work. And then fast forward 4 or 5 years, and you've got people running around the streets chasing dogs for food. So here's the article in Crain's, the headline by our friend Greg Hinz, political reporter there. Pay-to-play politics is bad, but it works. That's his conclusion from a business survey that finds that most of the business leaders in Chicago surveyed say that corruption's a problem and ethical behavior is non-existent and you got to hire lobbyists and crony capitalism afflicts the city. But, you know, it all kind of works. Does it work? City of Chicago is the worst run and worst run major city in the country, and it's in the worst financial condition of any major city in the country. In fact, the debt per capita load in Chicago is higher than it was in Detroit prior to Detroit's bankruptcy.
So every morning I read the Wall Street Journal and the Caracas Business Journal. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
Those are my two mainstay publications. You know, what I find interesting about this survey, well, first of all, you know, Hinz, his knowledge of economics and politics, I'll leave it at that. But what I find interesting about it is sort of this, I think all this is really bad, and so I've absolved myself of any responsibility for it because in my emotional state, I think this is really bad. But hey, I got to do it. I've got to participate in this in order to get anything done. And really, it's just a spoils game. Can I get to that little bit at the top of the pyramid so I can get mine, irrespective of what happens to everyone else? And that's really what's going on.
Well, that's the problem with rent-seeking conduct. And this is how you rationalize by saying, hey, these are the rules of the game they set, and I'm just trying to get my piece of the pie. But rent-seeking begets rent-seeking.
Wouldn't you feel better, though, Dan, if they just said, that's what I'm doing, instead of, oh, I have such a moral affliction to this, but I just have to do it. That's what's really a giant disconnect.
If I don't do it, somebody else will, and I'll get cut out. And so corruption doesn't beget people saying, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It begets people saying, oh, I understand how this works, and I want to get in line for my special deal, my waiver, my inside contract. And so it becomes self-propagating right to the door of bankruptcy. And somebody who knows a lot about the Stockholm Syndrome, the virulent strain of Stockholm Syndrome that afflicts the city of Chicago and its denizens, is Faisal Khan. He's a former legislative inspector general for the city. Now he's the CEO of a group called Project 6, which is an independent nonprofit dedicated to investigating, exposing, and ending government corruption in Chicago and throughout Illinois. And he joins us now. Faisal, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So what was your reaction to the survey and kind of the survey results that Greg Hinz reported in Crain's in terms of business leaders' attitude, and then kind of the dismissive, yeah, but, you know, that's the kind of rent-seeking, insider dealing and self-dealing that makes Chicago the city that works?
Yeah, unfortunately, Dan, the numbers didn't surprise me in any way. I mean, when you're talking in percentages, over 90% of people believe that they're participating in a corrupt system. That's a problem, but unfortunately, that's been the Chicago way. And equally unsurprising, unfortunately, is the apathetic attitude towards it, that they've accepted this as the ingrained culture here in Chicago. And that's what as one of my goals at Project 6 is to change that culture, change that attitude, kind of get us back to getting our outrage back and saying that enough is enough. This is not the way business is supposed to be done. Business isn't done like this anywhere else, and it shouldn't be the way it is here in Illinois.
Hey, Faisal, it's Pat. Thanks for being on the show. So you obviously saw this from the inside during your time as Inspector General. Now looking at it from the outside, what are realistic steps? What's a realistic path so that, you know, the public can feel that, you know, business is on the up and up, that everyone has sort of an equal chance in a free market economy versus, you know, what's happening and failing under the current pay-to-play system?
That's a great question, Pat. And I think the primary or the first step is always transparency. People have to be able to look at what's going on in their elected officials' offices. We have to be able to see what contracts are being given out, how money is being spent, who's getting what jobs. And so this idea of transparency actually has to be executed rather than just simply talked about as talking points. And that comes from this mayor, that comes from any elected official that always promise these things, but in reality never actually happen. So we start there. We start with transparency, and then we have to work our way up from there.
Well, the legislative, your time as legislative inspector general must have been quite revealing, and I wonder what you think kind of the fundamental problem is. Is it a purposeful effort to advance the rent-seeking culture, the crony capitalist culture, if you will, or is it just inertia that's been built up over time and it's just very difficult to reverse, even if there's a lot of well-intended people in City Hall who would like to reverse it?
I think it's more of the former rather than the latter. I think that there's a certain amount of protectionism that goes on for an elected official once they get into office. And once they see what kind of power that they have and what resources they have to unilaterally make decisions, I think there's going to be a great deal of resistance when taxpayers ask them to give that up. So that's a major component of this, is simply that the system has been rigged for such a long time in favor of the elected officials. To kind of radically change that is going to be a battle. And coupled with the inertia that you've described also, there is just a lack of movement, and there will be a lack of movement until someone says enough is enough and decides to really focus on taxpayer interests rather than self-interest.
I'm sorry,
yes,
Faisal. So it's Pat again. So this is a troubling thing for me because, it seems like, and this is true in Chicago with what you guys at Project 6 are discussing, but across the state and in some respects across the entire country, there should be more outrage against these sort of governmental constructs that are taking advantage of the taxpayer to such an extreme degree while the taxpayer suffers to get through their daily life. But yet that outrage that doesn't seem to exist at the level that it should, at least locally. And then oftentimes it doesn't manifest itself in electoral activity or political activity. What can be done to sort of stoke the outrage or put it in the right direction and make structural change?
So I agree with your assessment entirely that there is this apathy has just set in across this city, across this county, across this state, where people simply are, elected officials doing something corrupt has become the same as winter is cold in Illinois.
Right.
It's just part of this world, and we've accepted it. And I don't know why that's happened. I think it's probably because it's gone on for such a long time that people simply don't know any other different type of life or a different type of government that they should expect. How do we fix this problem? We highlight as much as we can. We bring it to the attention of everyone and make the connection, explaining to them, guys, how corruption affects them. That an alderman stealing money on the south side does affect you on the north side. That's why your property taxes go up. That somebody doing on the west side affects somebody on the south side. People don't make that connection, and my job at Project 6 will be to explain to people exactly how they're being harmed. They just simply don't understand or aren't interested enough to understand why someone giving somebody a contract who's a friend of theirs somewhere will result in possible payments that will go up for each individual taxpayer.
When you talk about the need for political leadership of a different sort, that's essentially, you start in the mayor's office, you start on the fifth floor, and that's essentially what Rahm Emanuel promised during his runs for mayor, successful runs for mayor. And I wonder, based on your time as legislative inspector general in City Hall, do you find that Rahm Emanuel's rhetorical commitment to transparency and some of these other qualities you're discussing is matched by activity in the mayor's office?
And unfortunately, the answer is no. This is not a personal thing, this is strictly a professional observation from being legislative inspector general for 4 years of the city and watching the ethics ordinance under this mayor get weaker and weaker and weaker, and more elected officials taking advantage of the system to help themselves rather than to help their constituents.
All right.
It's all rhetorical.
All right. He is Faisal Khan, former legislative inspector general for the city of Chicago, now the CEO of Project 6, which is an independent nonprofit that's investigating and exposing for the purposes of ending corruption in Chicago and Illinois. And look for a forthcoming report from Project 6 on illegal campaign contributions in Chicago. We'll be interested to continue following Project 6's work. Faisal Khan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.